Hi, I'm Randy Horton, Chief Solutions Officer at Orthogonal, coming to you at the end of day 2 of LSX World Congress at the Boston Convention Center. You can't make it to every conference. Even if you can't talk to every person or hear them speak at every conference. So what we're doing is curating a set of conversations with some of the most interesting and innovative people going on at LSX World Congress to give you the TED Talk short view of this. And we're having some conversations. Right now, we're here with Mahesh Narayanan from Neuvation Ventures. I was close, but in my head, but Neuvation Ventures. Mahesh, welcome, and tell us a little bit about your firm.
Absolutely. Thank you, Randy, for having me. Again, I'll start with the story of my background, and then we'll move it through what I do now, which is a venture fund around brain health. So my background's in neurology. I did my graduate work at Penn in neurology, went into big pharma for a couple of years in the neurology space, and then moved into oncology before coming out to start a couple of my own companies where we were lucky enough to exit out of 2 of those ventures. And so in 2020, moved more into the VC space, primarily looking at solutions for my own family member who was diagnosed in autism spectrum, which inspired me to kind of try to figure out what is now out there for this particular disorder. And unfortunately, we couldn't find too many. And then so it inspired me to start looking at more early stage innovations rather than those in the market, which led me to meeting with other investors and foundations that were also passionate about the space, and got involved in quite a few of those organizations, including the Autism Impact Fund, to kind of figure out what's out there, which sparked my own interest in creating my own fund to try to see if we can not only discover, but also invest in these solutions and be part of that impact long term. And so that's what inspired us to start Neuvation Ventures back in 2023. And we primarily invest in all of brain health. We don't stop just at autism because we know that the brain's very well connected. So what can help those the autism spectrum can also help those with Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and many other aspects of brain health. We invest in medical devices, diagnostics, and deep tech that touches anything between the brain and the spine.
That's a whirlwind. Okay, so give us an example, if you could, of a portfolio to a company or two that you think really illustrate why there should be investment in it, besides obviously the fact that the brain is kind of an important organ.
Yeah, absolutely. One, I'll try to give you an example on the diagnostic space, which I think is very important right now, but also on the medical device space. So on the medical device side of it, one of the interesting companies I've had is in the brain hemostat space. So it's there to stop the brain from bleeding too long. And right now we pretty much use gauze and protein like we do with the rest of the body. And unfortunately, we don't necessarily know when the brain stops bleeding. And so we have the standard time of 3 minutes or so every time the brain bleeds. And that can actually add up to hours within a surgery. So a 5-hour surgery could actually have about 2 hours of just waiting for the brain to stop bleeding. And what this company has created is a solution that will allow, using, in essence, simple sugars to create this compound that they can spray on top of the brain before the surgery happens. And then they can incise as many times as they want. Because it's clear, they get to see exactly where the incision is taking place. And because it's clear, we also know when the brain stopping bleeding. And the best part is that it's actually able to stop the bleeding of the brain within a matter of seconds versus minutes, which is a significant time saver, resource saver, and a better outcome for the patient. Because, going back to high school biology, the brain uses sugar as energy. And so they can actually finish the surgery and just close up the skull and move on, because eventually the brain will just absorb all of that sugar directly as an energy source. So there's no cleaning, there's no post-operation surgeries or anything like that. So
you just use like gummy bears or something, or does it have to be the sugar?
It has to be a little bit more complicated than that because gummy bears are not sugar, they're gelatin. And so it's a different compound. But the idea is very similar, right? And so it makes it very easy for surgeons, for patients to adopt this, and it's using the same workflow that we already have. And the diagnostic space we're seeing so much with vision learning, especially we're able to track eye movements, motor skill movements. So we have companies in our portfolio that are using the way that someone's moving their eyes to see if we're able to predict any type of long-term neurological effects, because the eye is so close to the brain. It's actually very easy to correlate issues in the eye to issues in the brain. And so we're using that to diagnose things like autism or ADHD, but also looking at long-term effects like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, leading up to dementia, and seeing the severity of those disorders and diseases in patients. And so that's another diagnostic focus that we have, of just using the eyes and hand movements to figure out how diseases are progressing, because again, one of the key issues in brain health is that there's no biomarkers. The brain doesn't give out proteins or signals saying something's wrong. And so it's quite good at doing that and covering up what it actually is wrong. And so we have to find other ways of diagnosing things that from a typical biomarker And so we use behavioral markers and phenotypic markers to figure out, is something really happening in the brain without actually going inside the brain.
All right, so let's talk about something. In spite of what we read, everything in medtech is not AI these days.
Sure.
There are pure AI and digital solutions. There are purely non-digital solutions, at least in the solution itself.
Sure.
You may use AI and digital to develop it. And then you have hybrid things, or things that are not necessarily AI or digital now, but could be in the future. The running joke, of course, among people raising money is that you have to start with your LLM slide up front and find some way to say, yes, my protein is a smart LLM protein or something. How do you look at that as an investor, trying to look both forward without jumping on the bandwagon that everything has to speak AI?
And it's interesting because I feel like in healthcare, we've been using AI for a time, but it's come more into forefront because of ChatGPT and generative AI. But I think a big part of biotech, there's a reason that's the word tech in there. A lot of it is technology involved. A lot of it's software development. We've been using bioinformatics to design drugs for a long time. We've been using software as a medical device. Now it's come up much further so that we can actually use software as a way to diagnose and treat patients. We actually have another company that's looking at using software for spinal cord injuries and seeing if there's anything wrong with the spine before we cut the person open, just using vision. And so I think there are a lot of applications in AI that is very well positioned for science, and it always has been, because so much of medicine, unfortunately, has been subjective, especially in areas like pain or behavioral health, because there's nothing to measure how someone should be functioning. And those are very much subjective measurements. I think AI is able to use pattern recognition and figuring out, this is what you should be doing, or this is what you typically do. But now, these are things that are doing that's out of that norm. And then the other aspect is remote patient monitoring. I think that's becoming a much bigger topic amongst investors, because patients don't want to be in the clinic all the time. They don't want to be in the hospital all the time. And if you can monitor the patient and see if something's wrong at home, and then notify the physician, hey, something is amiss here, the patient might miss it, but the machine and the software might not. And so those components excite us a lot, because I think now we can actually catch things earlier on than we typically do. So we don't have to wait till things get to the point where they have to be in the emergency room or the surgical room to figure out, oh, these things are wrong. And so I think that's really what excites us when it comes to technology and how AI is being implemented to learn those type of strategies.
So there's some very clear sort of broad use cases for how it can add value. So let me ask you a couple questions, because you have a lot of deal flow. I'm sure you talked to a lot of people. You've probably talked to more people here at LSX than you can remember. How many companies come to you and they have a digital story that's absolutely cockamamie?
Oh, a lot of them.
Okay.
And I think part of it is because a lot of people that come to us, they have a very technical background, but they're not developers in software. They're not developers in engineering. They certainly, might not have the business acumen. So they're really good at the science, but then everything else kind of, falls apart very quickly. And that includes, software that's needed to monitor patients, or software that's needed to interact with the provider or the payer, or the healthcare system is so complicated, and trying to put all that together in the software component is quite hard for most companies. And so when we look at the software, we're often looking at the tech stack, and then what are you using? It's like, we're using something very basic like SQL, or is it we're using WordPress to build this? I was like, how are you using such simple things for such advanced mechanisms? Because it's such a highly regulated space. And I think that's the other component, is that we have HIPAA regulations, we have GDPR regulations, we have all these other regulations that are meant to keep patients and data safe. But then most companies forget that. And so they've come up with this very easy solution that it works for them, but doesn't really work for everyone else, including the patients or the providers.
Interesting. And on the reverse side, how many people come to you with a great non-digital solution? You listen and say, this is interesting, but you're completely missing the enormous data opportunity here on the other end. You haven't even explored what you could do with this once you start doing the physical part.
Oh, absolutely. And again, I think it goes back to that remote patient monitoring component, right? I feel like there's so much data that needs to be collected or has to be collected. And a lot of these solutions completely miss that component. They're like, hey, this works for the patient at home. It's okay, great. How do you know that? How can you monitor that? Then how can you take that data in? Because at this point, data is the value that most companies are creating. Whether it's drug development or not, that drug development even has data on how it interacts with patients, how it's being sold in the long term, or how it's being prescribed in certain ways. And all that data has to be managed from the beginning. And if you don't have a plan to manage that from the beginning, and actually it's a red flag for a lot of investors saying, oh, I'm going to create the solution, but I have no way how to manage the data or manage this platform in a way that's cohesive, protects the patients, at the same time can be, in some cases, monetized in a way that's, helpful to the company as well, because that means they might have a better exit and use that opportunity, because oftentimes the data is going to double or triple the value of the company than just the solution itself.
And how do you vet a team? Because they're very different worlds, right? What do you look for in either the skills the team has, the backgrounds, or their openness to incorporate somebody to kind of be the yin to their yang? What do you look for with that as an investor?
So, that's what we call coachability, right? And oftentimes that's the first thing we see, especially in life sciences, because we deal with very smart individuals and they're coming up with these brilliant ideas, but they know what they know really well, and oftentimes they don't know what they don't know. And so when it comes to coachability, we want to talk to individuals and back individuals who are willing to listen to what we have to say, because we get to see a lot of these from both the business perspective as well as the other aspects of that business. And so that includes looking at data, that includes looking at technology. And oftentimes we want founders who are willing to take that guidance from us and say, hey, you need to bring this individual in or this group in or someone with that expertise in to help you develop this process, because you've built your product and you know that area really well, but it needs to be packaged in a way that's accessible. It needs to be packaged in a way that you can actually sell it to other companies, other big pharma, other founders, or other providers. And we certainly look for individuals that are willing to listen to that, willing to bring on team members that we recommend, or at least if we tell them we need to go find one, they actually are able to go find those individuals and bring them to the team. So the coachability component is a very big part of early stage investments, because for the better or for worse, at that point, the science is still very early. And so we are very much relying on the team and executing on it in order to succeed. And so we will always invest in an A team with a B product versus a B product or an A product with a B team, because we know the A team will figure it out somehow, even if it's a bad product, but a B team might not be able to.
Okay. Do you get a lot of B teams with A products?
Oh, absolutely. We see that more than not, actually. Where the product is great, but the team is just not there for us to go ahead and invest. So that's more often than not a big reason for why we say no.
Interesting. Why don't we wrap with a question of what have you seen at LSX after 2 days that's been interesting to you? And, what have you spotted going on in the industry?
Oh, absolutely. I think a lot of interesting conversations with founders as well as other investors on where the trend is going. And I think and also really very interesting panels as well that we're part of as well as for listening to. And I think a big trend is moving more towards single asset companies versus platform companies. And I think that is across all of healthcare. So not just in brain health, but across oncology, immunology, cardiology, and really focusing on a clear indication and building a very clear product. And the underlying idea is that the team has focus. What we've seen is that companies that come with just a platform, they just seem unfocused, and their entire premise is we're going to license this out to all the other people that have the focus. We're going to go invest in companies that have the focus rather than the platform, because they have something to aim for and go after, and not relying on other people to do their work. And I think that's a big trend that I feel like we've learned is you want companies that focus on one thing. Even if you have a great platform, keep the platform, but really prove out that technology in one thing, and we know that it works.
Eric Ries, who wrote The Lean Startup, has written and said that there's only one technology he would ever invest in without any customer validation, and that's teleportation. He said, besides teleportation, I want to see data on the viability of any other product.
Absolutely. The platforms are great, but it's just not enough data to say, yes, it's actually going to work everywhere else. Versus if you focus on one thing and really move forward, that seemed to be the trend of all the discussions we've had, is every company that came to us before with a platform saying, hey, we've heard you, here's now what we're doing, here's our asset, here's the drug, and here's our indication. Now does it make sense? So it's like, perfect. Now we have data to say this is going to move forward much further than just in the lab. Exactly.
So if you're going to get investments in a platform, you got to find a fund that's specializing in platform investments, and that's their thing.
Exactly. And unfortunately, that's far and few in between these days, because a lot of the platform funds have been burned because those companies just license it out, and there's just no exit strategy for licensing companies. They just keep licensing the same thing over and over, and no one wants to buy them out. And then a lot of those funds just haven't seen the returns because these companies are just continue licensing without any type of exit.
Sounds like a mortgage bond.
Yeah, unfortunately. So it's a great business model, but it's not a fundable business model for VC. If we have one, that's great. Just go license it, but don't expect VCs to fund it.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks for coming in.
Absolutely. Thank you, Randy.
We'll keep in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.